Of all the reasons that people give for rejecting the Libertarian Party, or libertarian philosophy in general, foreign policy is the most common in my experience. I find this strange considering all of the other hardline positions that they take on domestic policy. There are many juicy topics and policy stances that would impact the lives of American citizens directly, as opposed to the ethereal connection with foreign policy. I suppose the post 9/11 state of the country is a large reason for this, as well as the average person's lack of knowledge about libertarian stances. Libertarians talk seriously about legalizing all drugs and treating addiction as a health issue rather than a criminal one. We also talk openly about ending the Federal Reserve and even allowing for competing currencies alongside the US dollar. We would eliminate most taxation and regulation. Some of us would even take that all the way to Anarchy Town. We would end the Department of Education, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, the FDA, and so on. But all this takes a backseat to people's desire for the US military to crush any perceived threat to the US, no matter how tenuous. The Libertarian Party foreign policy is simple: focus on free trade, avoid entangling alliances, and avoid wars that do not concern us. The war on terror has created an excuse to get involved in every conflict in the Middle East. While the conflicts there are incredibly complex, I think I can boil it down to one important point. There are no good guys in the Middle East. There is no real movement there for Western-style democracy, and it refuses to take hold no matter how hard we try to push it on them. The very act of siding with any group in the Middle East is to side with the bad guys. The governments are corrupt and oppressive, many of which the US government has been funding and arming for decades. And the rebel groups are virtually all chapters of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they would implement their own oppressive state if given the chance. We have had 15 years of invasions, occupations, drone strikes, toppling dictators, and arming rebels. Recently, it has been uncovered that the Pentagon has lost trillions of dollars and lost track of hundreds of thousands of weapons. Not to mention all of the arms it has intentionally gave and sold to corrupt dictatorships all over the world, with what appears to be the intention of arming every rebel group in the Middle East, only to be surprised to find that they turn these weapons on each other or just join the bad guys. If we were to look at the results of US foreign policy versus the intentions behind it, we would find a complete failure. We are less safe, and the Middle East is more unstable than it has ever been. No serious libertarian candidate for office is calling for mass disarmament or the dissolution of the US military. We want to bring all the troops home, close the hundreds of superfluous bases across the world, stop arming rebels, stop bombings that are killing civilians, and use the military for domestic defense. If the current US foreign policy is not working, then our only choice is to change it. You can't continue doing the same thing expecting a different outcome. Conservatives especially need to come to grips with their disjointed view of government. They claim they want small government, but never question one of the biggest government programs in the history of the world, the US military. Military interventionism is big government, and it suffers from the same failures. It is poorly managed, it wastes money, and if it fails, it's given a money enema as a reward. If you're a fan of the Constitution or of civil liberties in general, you can't support interventionist foreign policy. Nearly every amendment of the Bill of Rights has been eroded by war and the lust to flex military might. The right to free speech, protection from unreasonable searches, trial by jury, states' rights, and so on. A wise man once said that war is the health of the state. If you want small government, you cannot support constant war. Say what you want about the refugee crisis and whether or not we should take them in. They were created by US foreign policy in the region. The lust for war and foreign intervention has created the conditions for masses of people from the Third World to migrate to the West. No one should be surprised that toppling governments in the Middle East and arming all sides of every conflict displaces millions of people. Now terrorists and those that have been radicalized can take advantage of these mass movements of refugees and the good intentions of the people behind it to bring the fight to our doorstep. I'm sure we're all familiar with the uptick in terrorist activity in the US and Europe. Good job, conservatives. You've kicked a bee's nest and you've shoved it in our pants. There is no way we can fathom the full repercussions to come. Liberals, you have been pacified by having your guy in office. Many attacked Bush for the simultaneous wars and the drone strikes in the Middle East, but then fell silent as Obama ran the surge in Afghanistan and conducted way more drone strikes than Bush ever did. And now you have the gall to run Hillary Clinton as your presidential candidate. She has had her hands in numerous conflicts in the Middle East when she was Secretary of State, all of them turning from bad to worse, especially Syria and Libya. She greenlighted the selling of arms to oppressive regimes in places like Egypt and Saudi Arabia. In fact, Saudi Arabia is putting all of those arms to use, bombing the hell out of Yemen. They just recently bombed a hospital in August of this year. Radio silence on all of this, though. Just like the conservatives, you are responsible for the refugee crisis. While you think you're practicing altruism by calling for them to be settled in the West, you support all the policies that made them refugees. And now, it looks like we might elect the warmonger who is directly responsible for the creation of the refugee crisis and appears to not have changed a single disastrous policy. Make no mistake, a vote for Trump or Clinton is a vote for more war and more intervention. It is a vote for the foreign policy that has destabilized the Middle East to the point where it has created the refugee crisis, and ISIS, for crying out loud. Now we have to fight over whether or not to take the refugees or not. We are now trapped with the mass suffering of third world peoples, and all Americans are stuck paying the check on top of the $20 trillion in debt we have going already. But whatever, if using the military for actual defense and reducing the harm it does overseas is too scary for you, then go ahead and reject the Libertarian Party. Forget about your appreciation for small government or humanitarianism and side with big government overseas and massive human suffering. At least own up to it when the repercussions of all this lands on our shores.